Trying to predict the future is a discouraging and hazardous occupation. In fact, it may not even exist at all. Many of the things we take for granted will one day pass away completely.
I open the door of heaven and hell.
When that time comes, men will no longer communicate. We may have diseases and barbarism. The whole world will cease to make any sense.
Films are not made to entertain the public only, but at times to either shape the mood of a society or to prepare them for things to come. Now, 28 Years Later is an apocalyptic zombie film based in the UK. And like its predecessors in the series, it shows how a society can violently act in a pandemic. But it wasn't the only pandemic preparedness that came out in the year 2025. A very little known operation that the public is not too aware of took place in that same year, very similar to the COVID-19 training simulation preparedness that came out in 2019, the year before the lockdown in 2020. Now, Britain's NHS, an abbreviation for the National Health Service, published a report in July 2025 called Pandemic Preparedness and Exercise PEGASUS. And the schools in the UK were training for something that looks like it is in the pipeline. Now, the European Commission also in July 2025 published a report titled The Next Pandemic. New study identifies global hotspots of zoonotic threats. And London's Daily Telegraph in February 2025 published an article titled Preparing for the Next Pandemic in a Global Responsibility, and the UK has a vital role to play. Now, the UK website gov.uk published a press release on the 16th of January 2025 titled The Largest Ever National Pandemic Response Exercise to what? Strengthen against future threats. And the Pandemic Institute Scientific Meeting 2025 partnership working for pandemic preparedness is an institute prepared for a pandemic in the UK. And in the UK, unbeknownst to most of the civilian population, there was a secret drill to prepare for another pandemic, where ministers admit they would close the schools again, according to the Daily Mail. Now, the Daily Telegraph newspaper on the 25th of November 2025 details this secret pandemic drill that has been called Exercise PEGASUS. And this is what took place in the UK that very few were aware of. And we shall quote a few excerpts. Quote, "Schools across the UK were locked down this autumn as part of a state drill to tackle the threat of a new deadly virus. It ran in 3 parts in September, October and November this year in 2025. Now, Exercise PEGASUS was designated a Tier 1 national emergency exercise, meaning it involved ministerial participation, that is, all devolved nations, and activations of COBRA, that is the Cabinet Office Briefing Rooms. Now, Exercise PEGASUS, which concluded last month and involved all major government departments, was the biggest pandemic simulation exercise the country has ever held. Now, those participating in the drill were told a novel enterovirus had broken out on a fictional island in Southeast Asia, where all the other coronaviruses all started. Interesting. Before spreading across the world. The spread of the imagined virus resulted in travel restrictions, sound familiar? School and business closures, and mask wearing in the UK and around the world. We are seeing a subtle increase of mask wearing in the UK. Trudy Lang, who is the Professor of Global Health Research at the University of Oxford, and look at the words highlighted, said pandemic drills like Exercise PEGASUS, that was test tried first in the UK, were now being held where? Around the whole world, and that there was a need to better share the results and findings. Now, all of this took place in the UK without nobody being informed, even though it was mentioned in the UK Parliament in July 2025.
And later this year, we will have the largest ever national pandemic exercise that will test the UK's readiness for future pandemics.
Many may be asking that with such a huge event that took place in the UK, why wasn't anyone notified? Well, those who are in the tight-knit circles privy to how the system works knows full well that the political machine in the UK is not managed by those you see in power, nor is affected by your vote. But the former heads of the top two UK political parties, Labour and the Conservative, tells us that the country is carefully managed by men who are unseen by the public.
People might think this is a rerun of a Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. How can you convince people that that's not the case?
Well, it's going to be a very different structure. The Labour Party is a very top-down, highly centralised party that is full of control freaks who want to control whatever goes on within the party.
I think it's important for people to understand, because people think the Prime Minister is all powerful or the Chancellor is all powerful and they can go into government and they can just pull the levers and things will happen. But actually, the government is controlled by the permanent bureaucracy, by the civil service. It's them who hire and fire the people that work in the government. They control the budgets of each government department. Okay. They make the decisions about how policies are implemented. So even if a policy has been signed off by a minister, it's a civil servant who says whether it's legal. It's a civil servant who implements it. It's a civil servant who signs off the budget for it. And that gives those people a lot of power.
And it also shows that actually nothing happens by accident in either government or at the top of my party. Everything is decided by a quite small group of men who decide who will be an MP, who will be a minister, when that minister's career will crash by pulling various levers, who will be Prime Minister and how long they will remain Prime Minister. And of course, Conservative Party voters and people who go to the ballot box think their vote matters. It doesn't matter at all because this stuff is all pre-decided.
So you have seen with your own eyes and you have heard with your own ears that those who are formerly in power in UK politics are openly telling you how the system works. And when people look at me odd when I tell them I've never ever voted in my entire life, this is the real reason why. For British politics and the government is carefully managed, where they sell you the illusion that your vote counts and that you live in a democracy. And this is why I, the narrator, follow the divine blueprint that instructs God's people to pray for those who are in power. And if you are to make a change in your community or in your society, do it at a grassroots level. With this global preparedness for pandemic part 2, I believe that most will not take heed, and I will give 3 reasons why. Even before all of us were even born, the structure and the foundation of the New World Order was already laid out. And all 9/11 did, and this extension of the US government called AI is doing, is that it has realigned us all onto a global digital system. And it will be hard for your average person to process that world domination is the ultimate aim and goal of the powers that be. Number 2, most people are either comfortable, complacent, gullible, or ignorant to what is really going on, and they lack any spiritual depth to make any efforts to see that their cherished freedoms are under threat. And number 3, very few are aware that history repeats itself over and over again. And if you do not learn from the mistakes of your forefathers, you will repeat them over again. Let us quote 4 credible authorities. In a book titled Terror over Yugoslavia, the late Avram Manhattan, who saw the generational damage of global wars, documented and said, quote, "Of all the great evils to afflict mankind," and look at the words highlighted in yellow, "the will for what? World dominion has brought in its strain the most sanguinary calamities. Indeed, it has been the most formidable and the most disastrous. People were dispersed by it, nations were scattered by it, cultures were made to perish by it. It broke and destroyed civilizations." This is the lasting effect of war and world domination. In a book titled How Are We Complete in Christ, William Whitaker lays it down why most people will be deceived, and he said, quote, "Ignorance," I repeat, ignorance, I repeat again, ignorance is the rust of the soul that blunts the edge of our affections to whatsoever is spiritually good. In a book titled Crux Ansata, written during the Second World War, when describing the attitude of his fellow Englishman, H.G. Wells said, quote, "None of the British mixture of peoples can be described as passionately religious." Nothing has changed. None of them indeed seem to be passionate in any respect. Their weakness and their greatest danger at the present time is their disposition to be reasonable, to let bygones be bygones, not to cry over spilt milk, to live and let live, and believe that all other people in the world have a similarly reasonable, equable temperament. Compromise and a lack of emphasis is in their nature. Maybe it is a Gulf Stream or something geographical that makes them like this. Maybe it is the fact that living, so to speak, at the end of Europe. They will fight for points, play the game, and they have to be smacked good and hard and spat upon and generally insulted before they can be induced to fight all out. When they realize they have been cheated and have got something they didn't bargain for, they may explode dangerously. This is why they are easy to manipulate. In London's Parliament Square is a statue of Benjamin Disraeli, the former 19th century British Prime Minister who worked with the Rothschild to purchase the Suez Canal in Egypt. And in his book titled Sibyl, the Two Nations, he shows that the majority of the British people, even historians and statesmen, have no clue about their own history. So this means they are a lot more easier to manipulate. Quote, "If the history of England be ever written by one who has the knowledge and the courage, and both qualities are equally requisite for the undertaking, the world would be more astonished than when reading the Roman Annals by Niebuhr." Now, English history includes the influence of races in early ages, of the church in our middle, and the influence of political parties in our modern history, are 3 great moving and modifying powers that must be pursued and analyzed with an untiring, profound, and unimpassioned spirit before a guiding ray can be secured. Generally speaking, all the great events have been distorted, most of the important causes concealed. Some of the principal powers never appear, on all who figure are so misunderstood or misrepresented. This is why succeeding generations in the UK are very gullible, not just because of the dumbing down of modern technology, but they have no clue about the past, and this is where Uncle Billy steps in.
By the next pandemic, I believe we can have what I call mega testing diagnostic platforms. They can be deployed quickly, cost very little, and test 20% of the entire population every week. We also want to get treatments out far faster next time. One of the most promising is monoclonal antibodies. These manufactured antibodies grab onto the virus and disable it just like your immune system, and can reduce death rates by as much as 80%. I also think that we'll develop new vaccines quickly, in large part due to this new mRNA platform.
This billionaire businessman, the eminent scribe's poster child and the public face for the final building blocks for what should rightly be called the current world order, for it is not new anymore, openly said at the beginning of the first pandemic how we should prepare for the next one. And Britain has been the dummy run or test trial for the rest of the world. Why would an island at the top of Europe that once had the largest empire in human history be a target? Though other countries are doing it, the UK is seeming to lead the trend in weather manipulation. So she is stepping out of an ethical zone and tampering with the elements, with the clever argument of to prevent climate change, to put the public's guard down. She is working with the UAE, where their shared millions will drown the sounds of the suffering in the Sudan. But the UK has been a target since she lost her global colonial prestige during the two bloody European 20th century wars and its aftermath. Now, the current monarch of Britain, King Charles III, is the largest landowner on the earth. But under the late British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who privatised the entire country, where Britain now exports nothing, historians and economists now label Britain a beggar state. For she now imports practically everything. Now, in a book titled The Road to Wigan Pier, the British novelist and poet Eric Arthur Blair, who wrote under the pen name of George Orwell, boasted that our civilization, talking about Britain, is founded on coal, more completely than one realizes until one stops to think about it. The machines that keep us alive and the machines that make the machines are all directly or indirectly dependent upon coal. He wrote this in 1937. But today, Britain imports all of her coal, a large volume of it coming from Japan in Asia. Now, why is that? Well, if you read an article in the Telegraph newspaper titled "The Left Still Prefers Myth to Reality, 40 years on from the miners' strike," published on the 5th of March 2024, you will see that both parties do the exact same thing, following the same policy. Quote, "Coal mines, it is said, had been shutting ever since nationalisation in 1947. Clement Attlee's Labour government closed 101. The Conservative under Harold Macmillan closed 246. Labour, led by Harold Wilson, closed 253 in his 2 terms in office, twice as many as Mrs. Thatcher did. Production peaked in 1913 when more than 1,500 pits extracted some 290 million tons. But by 2013, that had fallen to under 4 million. The last deep pit in the United Kingdom at Kellingley in Yorkshire closed 2 years later, and the remaining few open cast mines have also shut. As the pits closed, by the mid-1990s, just a handful were left. The communities that relied on them, guess what happened? Collapsed. Now, when whole communities in Britain that totally depend on the mining industry for generations and generations, where the man was the sole breadwinner in Wales, in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire in the British Midlands, that made up one of the country's largest coalfield areas, are hit hard both economically and socially, where it changed Britain's economic landscape, are now completely given over to drugs and crime. So sad. Whereas there is no industry and they feel the government has neglected them, whole areas have resorted to violence and heroin addicts. This is the government's fault, not immigrants. This is why Britain has become a target, because she is vulnerable, and something else is happening that is sealing her demise and fate, and the public is also totally oblivious to it also.
This only took half a millennium to happen, 500 years. This goes all the way back to the Reformation in the 1530s, when King Henry VIII, wanting to leave his wife, and he wanted an annulment from the Pope of the time, but the Pope said, no, the sacrament and the sacredness of marriage, it applies whether you're the common man in the street or the mighty monarch of the United Kingdom. That caused a bitter divide at the establishment of the Church of England, and really huge persecution. Catholics across Europe, the Reformation, especially in Ireland, were penalised. People were killed for practicing their faith. So the wounds are deep and they're historic.
The Sky News Australia reporter and his cleverly distorted, one-sided, biased revisionist history failed to mention that there were just as much killings committed by Catholic monarchs backed by the popes during and long after the Reformation. Now, there are individuals in Protestant circles who view the meeting of Pope Leo XIV and King Charles III in 2025 as the final nail in the coffin for British history. And here's the reason why. The History of Protestantism is a 3-volume set written by the 19th century Scottish historian James Aiken Wiley in the latter half of the 19th century. And in the very last paragraph of Volume 3, Dr. Wiley said, quote, "While the throne of England continues to be Protestant, Great Britain will stand. When it ceases to be Protestant, Britain will fall." Though King Charles III's wife Camilla is the first Roman Catholic monarch since King James II, he also visited Pope Leo's predecessor, the late Jesuit Pope Francis I. And this has been an ongoing trend that started with King Charles's late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, who, starting in 1967 with Pope John XXIII, either entertained or visited most of the popes who were in office. And if you analyze this liaison from a prophetic lens instead of from a Protestant lens, beginning with the French monarch Clovis I, European monarchs and world leaders, according to Revelation chapter 17 and verse 2, have always given the popes homage. King Charles III meeting shouldn't really be a shock, but I will still give a little background of the separation between the papacy and England. In London's British Museum, there is a room with artifacts, mostly medals, from what Benjamin Disraeli described as the Church Age. The Stuart monarchs, King Charles II, Cromwell's successor, was openly a Protestant but secretly a Catholic. King James II, his successor and younger brother, attempted to Catholicize Britain, but he was overthrown. His grandfather, James I, was the first Stuart monarch of England, with many Catholic plots against his life. Now, he was related to King Henry VIII, the Tudor monarch, and you may want to know how. Well, in London's Victoria and Albert Museum, there's a bust of King Henry VII, the Welsh-born English monarch, the first monarch of the House of Tudor, and the father of King Henry VIII. Now, his daughter, the sister of King Henry VIII, Margaret Tudor, who was the Queen of Scotland by marriage to James IV, was the grandmother of Mary, Queen of Scots, whose medal is in the British Museum by her son James V. Now, Mary, Queen of Scots, was the mother of King James, but she was executed attempting to Catholicize Britain by force. Now, King Henry VIII's daughter, Mary Tudor, reintroduced Catholicism back into England and purged out all of the reformers. Now, this painting with the Pope in the background has King Henry VIII standing on the front left next to a cardinal, and he was originally titled by the Pope the Defender of the Faith. But when he separated England from papal control in 1534, he still remained a staunch Catholic, and it was actually his son and successor, Edward VI, who instituted the reforming. And this was as a result of William Tyndale's translation of the New Testament Bible, the precursor to the King James Bible. But there is an aspect of pre, and you can also say post-Reformation Europe, that is creeping back ever so swiftly into Britain.
I will not raise taxes on working people.
In that speech, I spoke about the Office of Budget Responsibilities review of productivity in the economy.
As we wrap up this study, the people in the UK are tightly holding onto their purses and wallets, but the future looks very bleak for the next generation. And there is an increase in crime, especially, sadly, among the youth. In 2008, Time magazine had observed that British youth are very unhappy, unloved, and out of control. And the few films that highlight their despair, like Wasteman, oh Lord, is not helping the situation either. For like many of these urban flicks, they seem to show that there is no way out of their situation. And in London, the capital, there is a new e-bike mobile phone theft craze, where these young men are always dressed in black, they are ballied up, meaning their face is usually covered in a balaclava, and they don't care who they harm. In a short Channel 4 documentary in the UK, these criminals said they would even rob 5-year-old children of their phones, grandmothers, grandfathers, and even people in wheelchairs. With that mindset, this generation of young criminals, unlike the criminals when I was growing up, have no boundaries. Now, who is to blame for this lawlessness? Well, there are a number of root causes. For quite a number of years now, there has been an ongoing huge increase of the closing down of youth centres in the UK. So the youth have nowhere to go, no recreation. A journalist in the London Guardian has said that these youth centres help to cut down crime. But others have observed that nobody seems to care, and this is all because of cuts by succeeding governments. Now, though the BBC did call it the end of hedonism when describing the nightlife and the club life in the UK, studies have shown that 3,000 clubs, bars and pubs have shut in London since the pandemic. In the last 4 years, 10 clubs close every month. But the place that has been nicknamed the Englishman's Church, the pub, one of the only places he gets to socialize, is shutting down also so fast. Where you can see that it is not just the minor communities alone that are being affected, but the whole of the UK. And it should be added that even many of the churches are being sold off. Where in many communities, the congregations are gone. This is why Britain is ripe for manipulation, and a medieval papal system that has never really properly left is imposing itself upon not just the British Isles, but upon the entire earth. There are many warnings, though not that loud, that we are entering into a state of neo-feudalism, a system that existed in many demographics around the world, but it was renowned in papal-controlled medieval Europe, when Rome reigned supreme with very little opposition. So what exactly is feudalism? Because during King Henry VIII's confiscation of the church's lands, his dissolution of monasteries, kind of or more or less ended feudalism. But it is creeping back. But according to the Reader's Digest Encyclopedic Dictionary, it is a European medieval system that is connected with, guess what? The ownership of land. But if you own your own land, you are a sort of free agent, where a freehold in law is where a property owner owns not only the land, but the building or property on it. Now, there have been a number of recent studies on the housing situation in the UK, and they are important to study when you see how feudalism is coming back in. Belvoir said that in 1918 the UK property landscape was dominated by who? Private renters, who made up 75%, that is 3/4 of all households. At the time, only 25%, that is a quarter of the population, owned their own homes. Now, the London Guardian published a brilliant study on the brief history of British housing, and it shows the slow but gradual growth of home buyers from the 1920s and how it grew exponentially from the 1950s to the 1970s onward. But now something has gone terribly wrong. And when Schroders compiled a study, what 175 years of data tell us about house price affordability in the UK. And even with that boom, look at the words highlighted in blue. Today, houses are more expensive relative to earnings than they have been for nearly 150 years. Now, it has been said, and this is an actual legal term in British law, that a man's home is his castle. But where you live and the land that it is on is turning into a war in the UK. And in recent years, there has been a sharp decline in landlords' ownership as a result of the housing crisis. And one of the reasons is called the Renters' Rights Act 2025, where the renters apparently have more of a say in where they live. And landlords that paid tax once a year, in 2026 have to now pay it 4 times a year. So as these properties get sold off, who is buying it all up? Have you heard of the companies Grainger, Lloyds and BlackRock? Well, all of these companies are buying up properties in the UK so less people can own them. Lloyds is looking and aiming to become a giant UK landlord where, like Wall Street in the United States, she's just buying up thousands of properties. And what King Henry VIII seemed to have cleared up is now coming back into place, with very few being aware of it. Grainger plc, a real estate investment trust, is the UK's largest listed residential landlord. And as the small landlords are disappearing, being replaced by the huge corporate landlords, laying the groundwork for no man to buy or sell, a US asset management firm is literally taking over the world. And Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, met with Britain's current Prime Minister, as of this recording, Keir Starmer. And what I am about to share may or may not shock you, whether you live in Britain or not. But BlackRock is even investing in the very cement and the bricks in the UK that people use to build their houses. They are leaving no stone unturned. And IB Stock is a company that BlackRock have their eyes on. I know, you've probably never heard of them. But as the narrator likes to have all of his receipts, the best place to look, as mentioned in the previous study on Nigeria and Donald Trump, is the London's Financial Times, where BlackRock bets on British brick making. And a portion of this article says, quote, BlackRock has become the largest shareholder in the UK's biggest brick maker. The giant US manager has increased its holdings in the 125-year-old Leicestershire-based brick manufacturer IB stock. So this is why Britain has become a target. Why? Because she is vulnerable. And for those listening around the world, England was the first test trial. No nation will be spared. Now, if life is spared, I will continue to keep you updated on Exercise PEGASUS. And more information will come out. Do you know why? Because these are powerful words that drives even at the doors. For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid that shall not be known.